So, hello and welcome to another astrology video from me. I was going to make a video about moon in synastry and how to read synastry easily by just looking at moon aspects, but then I got the comment on my Moon-Mars video about how I promised I would do Venus-Mars interpretation, and I was, caught up in the feeling guilty about not living up to my promise. I totally forgot, sorry. So I decided, you know what, sure, this is as good a time as any to do a video on the Venus-Mars conjunction, and since I'm at it, I will be talking about Venus-Mars conjunction, not just in composite, but also in synastry, so between individual charts. And I will also touch on the other Venus-Mars aspects, like the square, the opposition, the trine, and the sextile, even though, technically speaking, these are not strictly Vedic astrology. Only the conjunction and opposition are possible in Vedic astrology, and also Mars single aspecting Venus is possible in Vedic astrology. But sextile, trine, quincunx, and actually square, as the way it exists in Vedic in tropical astrology, does not really exist in Vedic astrology. And I mentioned this because I know initially I said, this channel is about Vedic astrology. It's mainly about Vedic astrology. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, Venus-Mars conjunction as an overall energy. And before I get into it, as always, if you want a personal consultation, please email me at the email address that I will write in the description. And if you want to get a free chart done, please look at the video description. I will write the link and instructions to get your chart in the sidereal zodiac. So thank you. Let's get into it. So first of all, Venus-Mars conjunction in synastry, which means in between individual charts. The difference between Venus-Mars conjunction in synastry and composite chart is that synastry means you either play the Venus or you play the Mars in this equation. Unless you have like a so-called double whammy where A person's Venus is conjunct B person's Mars and A person's Mars is conjunct B person's Venus, that's called a double whammy. And if you have this aspect, it also means that you will have Venus conjunct Mars in composite chart as well. So it's a very intense, passionate kind of energy between two people if you have this. But unless you have this scenario, if you just have one person's Venus conjunct the other person's Mars, the person whose Venus is being aspected will play the more feminine, passive role in the relationship, and the Mars person will play the aggressor or the hunter, if you will, the one who is pursuing Venus. And as I kind of mentioned in my Venus-Mars, not Venus-Mars, in my Moon-Mars video description, I mentioned that it's more uncomfortable for men to be in the situation where they are the moon person. It's similar here, but not as bad in a way. But it's still pretty somewhat negative, because men in most cultures, unless men tend to be, let's say, particularly passive or somewhat bisexual or, in some way, they will not enjoy being the Venus in this equation, and the woman being the Mars, being conjunct his Venus, because he will be made to feel, in some sense, emasculated. He will feel like he is the one on the receiving end of the woman's passion, if you will. The woman is like the hunter, she's the one who probably noticed the man first and was eyeballing him like a deer in the woods, and probably also is more likely that it's more likely that she made the first step. So yeah, so she's the pursuer in the relationship if she's the Mars. Which doesn't mean that, again, it really depends. Some men, they enjoy that. Some men may actually like, to have a really passionate, proactive woman who initiates, the bedroom activities as well, because a lot of the times that's what it means with this aspect. So he might enjoy it, especially if he in his own natal chart has this conjunction, Venus conjunct Mars, or if he has Mars aspecting his Venus in his natal chart. Then maybe he will be receptive to this kind of conjunction, because he will be used to the idea of women being passionate. His Venus or his female archetype will be intertwined with male energy to begin with, so he will like women to be like that. Okay, I digress. So yeah, the conjunction. So in synastry, it's simply, first of all, this is a great aspect. The conjunction is a great aspect to have. It is, especially when it's the male Mars and the woman's Venus, it's perfect, because it means that his masculine energy is being accepted and welcomed by Venus. Him by just being himself, by being by expressing his natural masculine energy, he will be very well received, and he will make the woman feel feminine and loved, and they will have a lot of fun together in social situations. It will be a very passionate relationship. It also means that they are sexually compatible and romantically compatible, and the conjunction provides really a long-term physical attraction between two people. So it's great to have in a long-term relationship, because it is unlikely that they will get tired of each other, although with any kind of Mars aspect, there can be a surplus of passion, so there could be a bit more arguments than average, but that doesn't have to be a negative thing. If you have the Mars square or the Mars opposite Venus in synastry, on the other hand, that could be somewhere between positive and negative, because what it means when you have the square or the opposition, it means that the person who, let's say the man has his Mars square the woman's Venus, it basically means that he is too passionate for her taste. He's too aggressive for her taste. It could also mean that kind of situation where, he is in the mood for bedroom activities and she's having a headache, she's not necessarily having a headache, but you know what I mean. It's she wants lovey-dovey, tender stuff, and he will be all hot and bothered. It's that kind of a relationship. And obviously, when it's the other way around, it's somehow even worse. If it's a woman's Mars opposite a man's Venus, he will feel aggressive. He will feel like he is aggressed or something. He is assaulted almost by the woman, because the woman is too aggressive for him. Okay, that was a small parenthesis on the negative aspects. So, yeah, I mean, it is a very passionate aspect. And like I mentioned, actually, in the Moon Mars video, Venus is, unlike the Moon, it is the social side of you. It is the part of you that shows how you like to be loved, how you express love. It shows your sense of pleasure, how you get pleasure, what you enjoy to do for fun. And so it's Mars conjunct Venus is very romantic, unlike Moon Mars, which is not necessarily romantic. It's more it's more, let's say, natural and primitive, and it's zesty and passionate, but it's not necessarily, Venus Mars is more refined and more fun, more delicate, and there's more role-playing and stuff like that. You could actually, role-playing is a thing with this. This could be the kind of aspect that makes people enjoy dressing up on Valentine's Day in weird costumes and chasing each other around the house. That kind of a thing, because Venus is arts, and Mars is sexuality, so yeah. And there's also a nice harmonious blending of the Mars, which is sexuality, pure sexuality, and, Venus, which is love. So a perfect blending of masculine, feminine energies. So yeah, the composite chart, right? The composite chart is, it's not, synastry is how two people affect each other as individuals, as individual entities, you know. So, like, in a synastry, you'll have, like, Venus will perceive the Mars person as the aggressor, or, like, the one who is passionate and proactive about pursuing her, and she will be the Venus person. She will stand there and be attractive and, you know, powder her nose and do all the little Venus things of sugar spice and everything nice to attract the Mars person. But in Composite Chart, the Composite Chart is your relationship as kind of a third entity. It's a separate entity onto itself. And another thing that you have to understand is that composite charts really only start to play out their energy once two people are really settled, like starting to actually be in a relationship. They start to function together as a couple. So you may not feel it on the onset of a relationship. But you will feel it like when you start to really live together as a couple, maybe you move in together, that's when the composite really starts to play out. But in the composite chart, the Venus-Mars conjunction is actually really good. I mean, it's one of the top aspects to have in a composite chart, because this will show the kind of chemistry where you never really get tired of each other. You will be physically compatible, the lovemaking will be very satisfying for both of you, and this is a very important aspect because a lot of the times in relationships that's what happens. Like the sex part is a part that is causing a lot of frustration, you know, like maybe one or both people lose interest over time, you know, they get sidetracked, they fall in love with other people, whatever, stuff like that. There's not enough passion. But with this aspect, you will always be passionate with each other. This is the kind of aspect where, like, even if you break up and you see each other after 5 years, you will still feel passionate about each other. It's, like, impossible to be kind of cold, lukewarm, or rational about each other, which can have its good points and bad points, you know, because, like, when it comes to a business relationship, this is not a great aspect. But in romantic relationships, it's great because you function as a union, and you will feel very happy together because you feel there is a harmonious blend of your masculine and feminine energies, respectively, for both of you. And it also shows they have a lot of fun together. So, yeah, I actually know a few couples who have this in the composite chart, and they have been together for a very long time. The sextile and the trine are kind of like close seconds to this, but they're not as, especially in the composite chart. I don't know about synastry so much. I mean, in synastry, trine and sextile between Venus and Mars, they still help, but they're not the kind of aspects that will generate a lot of heat and a lot of passion, and they're not the kind of aspects that will actually make two people want to be in a relationship, if that makes sense, but they will help once a relationship develops. But in the composite chart, having the Venus composite, Mars, trine, or sextile is again quite positive because you will have that physical compatibility and satisfaction in a relationship, and you will be romantic about each other. But the conjunction is the most powerful, the most intense of these three. So yeah, kind of like trine and sextile are more, let's say, watered down version of the conjunction. Well, they're still useful, but you know, the conjunction is where it's at. Let's see. Right, I did actually look for examples. Actually, one more thing before I get to examples. So about the square and the square and the opposition, they're not great to have, but the square and the opposition, things that I have noticed, I've looked at celebrity charts and I've looked at people whose charts I've analyzed. If you have this, like in synastry, where you have like square, the opposition, these aspects generate a lot of passion and a lot of heat. And these are the kind of aspects that can drive two people crazy, like to the point where they get into a relationship even though they know that this person is wrong for them, or that they shouldn't, like there's some kind of, you know, serious objection to why they shouldn't be in a relationship with this person, but they still feel crazy passionate about them. But with the square especially, there can be a lot of frustration over time. there's too much passion, there can be too much arguments, because there can be over time a lack of compatibility between your sexual and emotional needs. Like I mentioned, you have this dynamic where, let's say, the Venus person is too romantic for the Mars person, and the Mars person seems to come across as too aggressive for the Venus person, whatever. However, if you have the double whammy with this, meaning A person's Venus square B person's Mars, and A person's Mars square B person's Venus, you will actually have a conjunction in the composite chart, which is quite interesting when you think about it, because it means that as individuals you can get on each other's tail, but when you actually get together in your long-term relationship, you will really be very committed and very passionate about each other, and very compatible ultimately, because you will have the conjunction in the composite chart. With the opposition, there's still a lot of attraction, and you will still have like a tendency to have conflict, but because it's an opposition, there will be a bit more of a give and take and a harmony there than you have with a square. Like if I would have to choose, like between one synastry analysis where two people have just the Venus square another person's Mars versus Venus square the other person's Venus opposite the other person's Mars, I would say the opposition is better. But if you have like a double whammy, Venus square Mars, like I said, you will have the conjunction in the composite, so that's great. Also, if you have a double whammy opposition, that's also great. I'm not sure exactly what that forms in the composite. Maybe it also forms a conjunction, I'm not sure. It could be that you also form the conjunction. But overall, yeah, that's the analysis. Overall, the opposition is more of a give and take. It's more of a balancing act. So you will feel like you complete each other because you will be opposite ends of the spectrum. With the square, it's more of an annoyance, a friction there. But depending on the individual charts, that can actually be a great motivator to stay in a relationship, because some people, they love a hot-blooded, passionate relationship. So Venus square Mars can actually, to some people, can actually be better than the Venus conjunct Mars, right? So that's for the general description. The few examples that I have are Victoria and David Beckham. Victoria and David Beckham are actually like the poster couple for the Venus-Mars conjunction, because they have not only a double whammy between synastry, they also have actually understandably, if you have the double whammy conjunction between two people, you will have the conjunction in the composite chart as well. And needless to say, they have a very long-term relationship. They have like, with this aspect, like if you have a person's Venus conjunct the other person's Mars, and a person's Mars conjunct B person's Venus, and you also have the conjunction in the composite, you are very compatible from a romantic point of view. You're very passionate with each other, and this is obviously a very long-term aspect, especially since in their particular case, they also have Saturn thrown into one of the conjunctions. I don't remember exactly which one. Like, I don't remember if it's like, but I think it's like David's Mars conjunct. Wait, I think it's like David's Mars and Saturn are, or Victoria's Mars and Saturn are conjunct David's Mars, something like that. So they also have like, one of them also has the Mars-Saturn conjunction. So that adds durability and endurance in the relationship, and stability, because if it's like, if you just have this, and you maybe have also the moon thrown in the mix, or you have Rahu thrown in the mix, that could get really wild. But if you have Saturn, that's even better for long-term compatibility, even though Mars conjunct Saturn, I would not add that as like a hot aspect to have in a long term. I have had a video made on Mars-Saturn aspects, so you might want to check that. I don't know if I talked about the conjunction, but I think I did. Well, the conjunction is actually the least painful of the Mars-Saturn aspects, and it does show some durability, but it also shows kind of a painful interaction there, so I don't know about that. yeah, but definitely Victoria and David Beckham, you know, they are obviously a very compatible couple romantically, even though you may not, you know, initially, actually, it's funny because if you look at them and you look at their individual careers and their personalities, they actually may not seem like they are that compatible. But because they have this, you know, mutual Venus-Mars situation, they obviously feel very satisfied. Like, they feel like they can be, can have their romantic and sexual needs met in this relationship, obviously. So they feel great together. Another aspect that I have, not with the, actually with the conjunction, was Elizabeth Taylor and her late husband, Mike Todd. I think it was his Mars conjunct her Venus. I'm pretty sure they had the conjunction. I'm not, forget which one. But yeah, pretty sure it was his Mars conjunct her Venus. And, yeah, so, I think at some point she actually said that he was the love of her life. I'm not really sure about the quote, but I read it somewhere. And they had a great relationship, and he was very proactive about pursuing her and buying her gifts and lots of jewelry like she liked, and she was very much madly in love with him and spoiled like a little princess, so, which really kind of explains the Mars-Venus dynamic. You know, you have the man putting in all the effort to woo the woman, and that's what women like. This is why it's a great aspect to have in a romantic relationship when it's the man's Mars and the woman's Venus. Another example, you have a lot of examples with the square and the opposition. Like, for instance, Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher had the opposition. Forgot which one of them again. Like, I forgot which one of them is the Mars and which is the Venus. But they had the opposition in any case. And, yeah, passionate relationship, which, again, between two seemingly incompatible people, if for no other reason. For the reason that, you know, they have, like, a huge age difference. They had, because they did separate at some point. But, yeah, still enough attraction to generate a romantic relationship. And another example, Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt. They have, I think it's, yeah, her Mars square his Venus, his Mars opposite her Venus. So they have this, and they also have in their composite chart, they have the Moon-Mars conjunction. They also have a lot of Moon-Mars aspects as well. They have, I think, the double whammy Moon-Mars square. So this is a highly passionate romance. Like, even if they didn't have Mars-Venus, they still had the Moon-Mars aspects, which are very passionate, very passion-generating aspects, you know. But with the Venus-Mars, it shows, like, there's also romance there. And the square, especially, these are really, like, heated aspects, you know. And actually, when it comes to Venus-Mars, and this is kind of like how you see that Venus is more gentle. Like, Venus-Mars is more gentle than Moon-Mars. Because Moon-Mars is a much more primitive conjunction, you know. And because the moon is such a vulnerable point and so sensitive, Moon-Mars, like, squares and oppositions are actually a little bit worse in relationships than Venus-Mars squares and oppositions, because, yeah, they have to deal with, like, such a tender, delicate side of the psyche that a lot of people can't handle it. But with the Venus-Mars, you can just have, like, you know, if you have the square, sure, you may argue, but you won't really hurt each other on a deep level, if that makes sense. And it also, you can fool around and role play, which can actually be more of a turn-on in an underhanded way. So, yeah, but you have this Venus square Mars in their chart as well. Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt. Another example was Laurence Olivier and Vivian Lee. His Mars was square her Venus. And, yeah. Again, really passionate relationship. And also, like, you know, I don't know if you remember, I did that video on the Saturn conjunct Rahu aspect. Both of these couples, Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt, and Laurence Olivier and Vivian Lee, they also have this Saturn conjunct Rahu, and they also happen to have Mars square Venus. And I mentioned then in that video that, you know, Rahu conjunct Saturn, a lot of the times it shows up in synastry between people who leave a relationship in order to start an affair. Well, actually, I remember reading an article that said, you know, Venus-Mars squares is an affair aspect. So beware if like your spouse or your partner is having someone around who's that they have the Mars-Venus square with, because yeah, I mean, this is a side joke. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you're going to have an affair with everybody whose Venus is square your Mars or whose Mars is square your Venus. But I'm trying to point out that it is a very kind of like sudden jolt of passion, you know, when you have the Venus-Mars square. And it can be very disruptive, you know. So, yeah, that's probably why they call it an affair aspect. So yeah, like, this is it. Like, let's see if I actually had anything else. Nope, there's nothing else. There is nothing else. Okay, so this was my take on the Venus conjunct Mars. If you really enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Please tell me if you want to hear about any other aspects that you're curious about. Yeah, I hope to hear from you, and I hope you enjoy my video. Thank you.